Hi, I'm Alexandra Lyson, and I am meeting with Judge Brown today about the murder case of In Cold Blood. I appreciate you meeting with me this evening.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to know, how long have you been working as a judge?
I have been on the bench for, I am closing out my 5th year now, about to begin my 6th year in January.
Have you ever worked with murder cases or trials? And
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been a prosecutor, defense attorney, and now a judge, and so I've handled murder cases as a defense attorney, as a prosecutor, and as a judge. Yes.
So the case of Mr. Hickok and Smith, would you think these people would have been convicted in Texas?
I think just as in any jurisdiction, it's really based on the facts of the case, and that's what dictates whether or not there'll be a conviction or an acquittal. And so, from what I've read, it seems as though both individuals at some point confessed to the murders and were implicated in other ways, and then implicated one another. So I think that given that evidence, yes, they would have been convicted anywhere.
In a case that has as much publicity as this one, would you think they had a right trial, or one that's fair enough?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think that media definitely plays a part in all, trials. And so that took place like in the 50s. And so obviously that's completely different in terms of the media coverage then than now. And so it seems to me after the O.J. Simpson case, that's kind of where, it was the birth of court TV and all of these, court shows, and the focus on these criminal cases then sensationalized in a way. But the truth is that the courts have always been, open to the public. And so I think that the public has a vested interest in, seeing these cases played out. And so I think that, yeah, it's important to hold true to that right of trial by jury in public and so forth, right? But one of the things that we're concerned about in cases like this is that does the media coverage poison the potential jury pool, and does it affect, the jury in any way? So we allow media coverage in cases, but we certainly try to shield as best as possible the jurors from, being portrayed in any way, visibly by the media, and being on TV or anything like that, because it's kind of like a two-edged sword. We're telling them on one hand that they have to stay away from media, but then the media is right there in the court in front of them. So there's always a potential that can affect the trial. But so it's a balance to have it open to the public, but not have it affect the proceedings in a way that is unfair to either party. And I think in most cases it's accomplished.
Yes. And a jury that took under an hour to convict these two men, what would that make the trial be like?
It sounds like a slam dunk, or we say a lock and load. It sounds like there must have been overwhelming evidence if a jury came back in less than an hour. It seems as though that they were pretty soundly convinced of the defendant's guilt.
So in the case, Mr. Hickok, he confessed at the very end of the story that he did not kill anyone, and that it was Mr. Smith that ended up, he killed everyone, but he was still executed. Would you think that it was right for him to have been executed if he didn't kill anyone, Mr. Hickok?
Well, that's a kind of loaded question. First of all, the fact that one says the other did the killing is not surprising, and there's a old adage, and I've seen it to be so true, there's no honor amongst thieves, and certainly not murderers. When people's own life is at stake, you'd be surprised how people flip on one another. So I would say that the fact that one individual ultimately confessed to all the killings, but the other individual had already implicated himself, and at some point I think that they both were implicated in killing the the clutters.
Yeah.
I think that it really doesn't make a difference. And so I think the real question is, what was the actual involvement of both the parties? And so the fact that, Mr. Hickok perhaps did not pull the trigger, if it were his idea, if he planned it, if he was a part of it, if he broke into the house, if he, tied the people up, if he, encouraged Perry to commit the crime, it doesn't make any difference really whether he pulled the trigger or not. And so, in Texas, we have what's called the law of parties. And so it doesn't matter what his actual, exact involvement was in terms of pulling the trigger, but they all are legally responsible. And so I would say, no, it doesn't matter. And I think that whatever punishment befell both of them probably was suited based on what I understand the evidence to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because he was there when he shot him.
And not
When
just
Mr.
being
Smith,
there,
yeah.
not only just being there, but actually being an active participant. And so my understanding from my reading, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that Hickok was the one who planned it to begin with. And so if he planned it to begin with, and he was the one that was interested in, splattering, hair on the wall, and he was very, descriptive in what he wanted to do in terms of perpetrating the violence. And so if he did all of those things and encouraged it, was a part of it, then yeah, I mean, as far as the law is concerned, then they are equally culpable. And so whatever sentence befell them should have befell them both.
Yeah. So at the end of the story also, Mr. Hickok also complained that his attorneys were not right and they weren't high quality enough to help him through the case, and that if he had had other attorneys helping him with the case, that he would not have been executed. Would you think that the quality of these attorneys would have changed the case?
That's very speculative. So I'm assuming that they did not have money to hire their own attorneys, and they had attorneys that were appointed to them by the court. I'm assuming that's the case. And if that's so, that the Constitution requires that any person, whether they can afford an attorney or not, has the right to adequately funded, competent legal counsel. And so that's what you get. It doesn't mean you're going to get the best. You're not going to get F. Lee Bailey necessarily, or, in more modern terms, Johnny Cochran, or, some highfalutin criminal defense attorney. But you have to get a competent defense. And so we've had cases in Texas, especially in capital crimes. We, as the court and judges and the overseers of the process, have to ensure that people get competent representation. And so the system is set up here in Travis County anyway, and I think in most places that it's ensured that you're going to get competent counsel. And so it's purely speculative to say what the outcome would have been with different counsel, because, like I said at the very outset, it's facts that win cases or lose cases. It's not lawyers, it's facts in 90% of the cases. And so, yeah, could there have been an outcome with a different lawyer? Who knows? But it seems as though, especially if a jury came back in less than an hour and there was a confession and so forth and so on, as long as they had competent counsel, that's all that matters.